While making that last Buzludzha reel, I was looking through YouTube for a drone shot of the monument. In 2015, when I went, drones weren't commonly used. I found a few other videos instead. It turns out there has been a preservation effort to stabilize a lot of the communist mosaics I'd animated in the last reel. It seems the Bulgarians have adopted the idea that an act of destruction, even if it is through inaction, is not a solution, which brings me to my real reason for making this video, a reason I'd not set out to find, but have found compelling enough to mention. A non-drone shot video I found was of some Bulgarian dudes who made it up there about 2018 after a snowfall. They seemed to make the video to show just how to enter the ex-Soviet structure. I was curious to see how the monument may have changed. I noticed the red letters warning to never forget your past had been obscured, a warning unheeded by an act of deliberate amnesia, as it had been covered first by two signs forbidding entry. That, of course, is to be expected. What wasn't was the clear American flag motif with USA spray painted across the center. They'd painted red stripes on the doors since I had been there. Oh yeah, and as a side note observation, that pithy communist Coca-Cola graffiti from before had been covered by a much less talented graffiti artist. Kind of like the Marxism of yesterday morphing into the postmodernism of today. Anyways, back to Old Glory. The symbolistic display of our flag, when showcased by non-US citizens, is always compelling to me. Approximately 1 year later, in the beginning of 2020, I remember a video of students in Tehran refusing to walk over our flag and that of Israel in an anti-Ayatollah protest. Then, after COVID struck, we saw Cuban freedom protests erupt, with one Cuban man taking to the streets with a flag draped around his shoulders and waved about over his head.
They're fed up. They've had enough with communism.
Most recently, and hopeful, I think, was the full-throated defense of American democracy by a foreign leader over a major American news network.
Are you worried at all? Do you look...
No. I want to say this to the people of the United States. I'm not. I think that... I just get back to what I've been trying to say to you throughout this interview. I think that reports of the death of democracy in the United States are grossly exaggerated. America is a shining city on a hill. And for me, and it will continue to be so.
If we were to proverbially never forget our past and jump back approximately 200 years, just what would we see in our stars and stripes through the eyes of a foreigner? Contemporary to Alexis de Tocqueville, Lorenzo de Zavala described quite well what he saw in the young American Republic as a Mexican observer. While suffering political exile from Mexico, Zavala spent 2 years traveling the U.S. He had become radicalized in seminary school where he learned of the French Enlightenment, and also Jefferson and Madison, just north of the Gulf of Mexico. He made no attempt to hide his admiration for the North Americans' industry and earnestness in his writings. Zavala gives an even-handed assessment to nearly everything he saw. He condemns the peculiar institution of slavery, especially since Mexico had just abolished it. He also acknowledges Americans' odd tendency to isolate or exhibit other antisocial behaviors, but excuses it as a byproduct of their work ethic. The downside of the Americans' industry, Zavala confessed, was that Americans were codiciosos, stingy, or even greedy and quite cold in their business affairs. A classic complaint by Latin observers through to the present. He defends American egalitarianism against the condescensions from other European observers, appalled by the Americans' inability to appreciate leisure, which, incidentally, is another observation de Tocqueville would later make about the Americans of the Jacksonian age.
Like de Tocqueville, de Zavala is fascinated by Americans' energy and enterprise. He describes them as, quote, hardworking, active, reflective, circumspect, tolerant, thrifty, free, proud, and persevering, end quote. The symbol of the American, he suggests, should be a craftsman standing proud with a plow in one hand and a newspaper in the other. As a former newspaperman himself, he was blown away by the number of periodicals in America at this time, which in a nation of 12 million or so had several thousand, compared to maybe a few dozen in his native land. Literacy was near universal, and Americans of the time absolutely reveled in their first and most prized right, the freedom of speech. They debated political issues for fun, and the diversity of ideas that de Zavala describes hearing espoused is astounding. From atheism to theocracy, temperance to free love, even communism and anarchism, the variety of political beliefs entertained by these early Americans was exceeded only by the variety of religious beliefs that found expression in the new republic. And most fascinating for de Zavala was that almost all of these schools of thought found a way to trace their ideology back to 1776. America's secular religion was in full bloom and actively championed by 1830s Americans everywhere with the kind of zeal typical to new converts. And why shouldn't they have been zealous? In 50 years, their system had allowed for a few million farmers pinned against the eastern seaboard to quadruple the size of their nation, their population, and their economy. No royal prerogative, no petty bureaucrat, no staid cleric stood in the way of any man making a place for himself in this new nation. By securing men and their property, no matter the political outcome, and removing the 1,000 little points of political control that existed in systems such as the old Spanish one, it was as though the American system had made of politics a game, and by so doing, blunted politics as a tool of oppression or fear.
So maybe that is the answer to my question. They see a symbol meant to blunt politics as a tool of oppression or fear, but most importantly, as a symbol of freedom. Freedom. A word with a lot of miles on it in the States. But a principle with roots attached to it, to be sure. Going back to Cuba for a sec. I must mention some of the graffiti I saw everywhere in Havana when we had just gotten there, just before COVID. The graffiti there wasn't devoid of meaning. Some of it had legs long enough to carry us back to ancient Athens. It was simple. 2 + 2 = 5? I saw it too often to miss. It turns out there's an interesting 1984-esque short film on YouTube, provided if the math problem is typed in as such. But it actually reaches way back to ancient Greek thinkers. Plato, via Socrates, was the OG of based, anti-relativist Greeks. He very much knew arithmetic was the foundation of objective truth. Plato sneered at the idea of cultural moral relativism. He claimed it undercuts itself by allowing, in its own logic, the possibility that it is false. Practically speaking, if subjective reality and preference are all that exist, then by rejecting moral relativism, it ceases to exist as a reality, therefore, logically unsound.
What if I said that it's true? My truth is that you don't exist. Does that mean you no longer exist?
I was born in 1985. A bit over 10 years earlier, Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago was published detailing the horrors present in the USSR's network of political labor camps. When I once got a chance to see the inside of an abandoned one just outside of Tallinn, Estonia, I took it. Structurally, the building was about to be condemned. Some artists had gotten creative in some spots inside. But no amount of creativity can make pretty the chill still present in the former Soviet death row unit. Moral of the story, it's not a place you'd like to end up, so reconsider championing causes pertaining to human rights or notions sympathetic to our First Amendment in the United States. That was wrongthink, and all dissidents at the time were ground under the boot heel of a ruling class demanding nothing short of absolute adherence to whatever the current state-sanctioned party line was at the moment. Once again, numbers, arithmetic, embody fundamental truths, and speaking the truth is crucial to foster human flourishing. Societies built on lies require violence and suffering to maintain the pretense. The refusal to accept such a notion leaves a population prey to the blood-soaked ideologies put to practice in the 20th century.